To see it from.
All right, a bit of your feedback. One says, mimi kama mwananchi wa kawaida, here are my proposals, or this is my thinking. The 3,000 housing levy to be abolished. Who says I want a house? Maybe I own one already. Maybe I'm on mortgage. And what makes my employer not pay me less or put me on casual labor contract in order to avoid that new deduction for him? And the reality is that most of the people actually are even paid cash so that we do not pay NHIF, NSF and all that. And it is happening in the country. Perhaps they need to look into that. And as they speak of, those ones that evade tax, they go ahead to say 3% turnover tax. I might have transacted 500K in a year, but half of it or more are bills, deductions, and salaries. An additional 15,000 deduction is just adding to my losses. Maybe if it's a must, let them put in the business licensing and payable in the installments throughout the year. And then more taxes on fuel, or achane nayo. Is the president being advised as should be by the Ds of this world?
It's a yes and no. And if I can pick up from where the professor left, the issue of restructuring the debt and refinancing. IMF has also become very aggressive because we can borrow from the case of Ghana, where Ghana were almost in the verge of defaulting their national debt, and they reached out to IMF for bailout. And IMF said that if you have to come to your rescue, then the local investors who have bought your treasury bonds and treasury bills, they also have to suffer. And we saw a case where the IMF was recommending that the treasury bonds that have been purchased by the local investors in Ghana, the interest payments on those bonds had to be suspended for 3 years. And actually, the local investors were not allowed to even withdraw the money. We saw a case in Ghana where a retiree who had a chronic disease, actually suffering, being unable to access medicine because he had invested with the government, so that maybe after every 6 months, the government gives him some interest for the bonds, that treasury bonds that he had invested with them. But now IMF suggested that if you cannot come to us every other time as IMF when you have been unable to manage your debt and come to us saying that we need some debt forgiveness, partially or in entirety. So this time around, I think the president is very alive to that fact because IMF, if we don't comply with the conditions that IMF is pushing forward, then it will not be a walk in the park. IMF will push back. And if they push back and they tell us that, at the moment, the national debt that the Kenyan government owes, 50% is local and 50% is external. So if we go to IMF, telling them to suspend some of the conditions that are put into us, they might push back and say that even the local Kenyan who has invested with the government also have to feel the pinch. And I think that's why now the government is trying to avoid going the Ghana's way and saying, let's see how much we can be able to tax ourselves for us to be able now to reduce the fiscal deficit. But now they are also confronted by another hard fact that you cannot tax yourself to prosperity. It's like a man standing in a bucket and trying to lift himself using the same bucket that he's inside. So at the end of the day, the government has to come with some strategies to ensure that we borrow just enough and we raise as much tax revenue from within as much as possible.
Do you think the KRA, the government itself, has its structures well set at this very point? If today we say on our marks, get set and go, even with the current proposals that are there, then we'll be good in terms of collection, in terms of making sure that there are people who do not evade taxes, in terms of making sure that, fine, we have sealed all loopholes of corruption. And in your own wisdom, is the president getting the correct advice?
Even before I answer that question, I think there's a question which has come
From the viewer?
Yes, from the viewer relating to the housing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the area is not very clear. And I think as Prof is saying, there's need for that message to be communicated. What is this issue about housing?
3% and all that.
Is it that if I contribute, I will be allocated, or is it a pooling of resources?
Yeah.
Because my understanding is pooling of resources. So that at least we can do, I think there's social housing, and also the other one is affordable housing. And this one is to increase the chance that in the event, even if I don't get a house, at least someone like Prof will be able to get allocated. And
the irony of there are others who are saying from Kenya Kwanza that eventually then perhaps the money could be given back to you, or you could transfer it to your wife's account.
Yes.
And it's not quite clear.
It's not very clear. And I think there's need for that to be communicated to the taxpayers.
Yeah.
But my understanding is pooling of resources. That in the effect in long term, it might also reduce the price of housing.
Yeah.
Because much of the house prices is based on the supply. So if the supply is going to be increased, maybe that in the long term might be able to help.
Yeah.
My colleague has talked about debt, and that's an area where there's a major problem. And in most cases, especially debt where we are paying in hard currency, and we are not stimulating the sectors like tea, like coffee, like tourism, which are earning us exports. I think that's an area which is causing a lot of problem when it comes to pressure which is being handed over to our Kenya shillings. But to come to your question, I think as to whether the president is being advised correctly or not, I think the whole thing comes back to the issue of what choices do we have. When you're in a problem, like for example, if you start getting an headache, then that's a signal that you have a health problem.
Yeah.
So you have two choices: to accept that you are not feeling well and see a doctor,
right,
and then you are treated. The alternative is you get into what we call denial mode. You deny you're not sick, and the consequences might be, or your guess is as good as mine.
Yeah.
So where we are is not a matter of whether the president is being advised correctly or not, but it's a choice we have to make. First, have we accepted we are in problems? Now, even when we are asking ourselves that question, our actions, our talks should be such that we are in serious problem. And then from there, we come up with what we call mitigating strategies to address that. I think that is what Kibaki's government did when it came and found that the coffers were about 200 billion. Then it came to ask, so what do we do now that we're in this challenge? So the immediate thing is for the Kenya Kwanza government to accept that this economy is in serious problem. And therefore, we should talk, we should do things, we should make decisions which convinces Kenyans that we're in serious problems, and we have to make painful decisions. I think that's a major challenge which currently the Kenyan government is facing. Yeah.
Radical approach, painful approach. It looks like we still are at the mercy of the IMF. And I mean, at some point in time, Davide reminds us that you really do not want to be in the bad books of IMF because it will not be rosy for you. And I think we've seen this playing out across all the African countries, that if you are in bad books with IMF, it is not going to be good with you. So how do we create that balance, again, beyond politics, beyond our economy, and I mean also with the global fraternity?
It's a difficult one because we found ourselves in a fix. The IMF fix and the World Bank. These are institutions that are controlled by the United States.
Yeah.
If you are, for some reason, not in very good books with the United States, you are likely to have some IMF problems.
Yeah.
Like, and if for some strange reason you appear as if you and the Chinese understand each other,
it's even worse.
Then the IMF has a problem knowing what you are talking about.
Yeah.
So it's a global political situation. It is not simply economics. It is global politics. And how we got into this mess in the 1970s and 80s, some countries were induced to borrow money they did not need. I think Kenya might have been one of those, because those World Bank people have portfolios to build up.
Yeah.
So how many loans have you given out to how many countries? They'll pay later is not the issue, but just portfolios. And then after some time, the loans suppose started maturing. And when they were giving this money, Linda, they knew the money was not going to be used in the countries. They knew. It was going to some accounts somewhere else. But since it's portfolio building and scratching backs, so the countries are suffering today because of the bad decisions that were made at the time with the understanding of those institutions.
Okay.
Not that they don't know that the money is going back there. They know. But it's a loan that the country is now saddled with. The challenge that comes up is for new policymakers everywhere to realize that, and then try to figure out how do they come out of that jam. Reduce it by reducing the borrowing, and apart from reducing the borrowing, then cut on the unnecessary expenditures, which we have a problem cutting, because our presidents are good people. They like big motorcades. And some very big luxurious activities. So and then as they do that, they should also be very careful not to appear as if they might threaten the interests of the sponsors.
Yeah.
The IMF, the World Bank, and their sponsors in the West, mainly in New York, in London, in Brussels.
Yeah.
These are the people. So if they think that their interests might be threatened, they can be very vicious.
Yeah.
We have right now a realignment of two alliance systems coming up. We have the G7, the conceptual West, and arising out of that, mainly in response
Of
to
this.
the control, the BRIC system that's emerging. BRICS right now has about 5 countries officially, but there are about almost 30 other countries that want to join that.
Yeah.
And part of the reason they want to join it is because of the alternative financing system, which the BRICS is coming up
with,
to deal with the problem of the SWIFT. So now these are very serious developments.
Yeah.
And people who are doing that should be careful because they can die. It's said that part of the reason Gaddafi died is because he was saying he's going to start an African currency?
An African currency,
Yeah, that is an alternative to the dollar. And some people say, no.
We're not about to allow you to do that.
You cannot do that.
Yeah.
So the people whoever comes into office and has those ideas has also to be very careful. And to know the dangers, because it's a dangerous game. It said, let's say in the context of Africa, some of the people who have died in Africa is because they appeared to threaten those interests.
Yeah.
So poor Lumumba died. And what was his crime? People say that Congolese resources will be used by Congolese and Congolese interests.
Yeah.
He died.
Yeah.
Murtala Mohammed in Nigeria didn't even last very long.
Yeah.
Then he died. Sankara.
Yes.
He died. So there is a pattern. If somebody is going to raise fundamental questions, has to know how to deal with these forces in such a way that they don't feel too threatened to kill you.
Yeah.
Because they will do that. If you don't do that, if you do not know that, be careful. Don't get into things you don't understand.
Yeah.
And if that happens, then it can be worked out.
Okay.
And but it needs care. It also needs a lot of information, critical thinking, and independence of mind.
Okay.
We have a problem of leadership that does not have independence of mind. So we are still waiting for advice from the IMF and the World Bank, or somebody sitting in Brussels or London to give us advice, even on how to govern ourselves. Those challenges that require deep thinking, not just one person, but collective deep thinking, so that we can have a movement together in the right direction.
You see, the scaring bit of it is that in the prospect of the Westerners, as a professor would pretty much well highlight, then the global outlook of the people of Kenya economically does not look good, does not look promising. And on constant occasions, we've been asked, or even the president has been asked, do you suppose that we will almost go the Ghana way? And he says, no, we're not about to go the Ghana way. This in line with the prospects of these superpowers. What does it speak to us? That perhaps the end is not nigh, or the end of us bowing to the systems of the West is not nigh? Doctor?
I think the way we are going to conduct ourselves is the way we'll be taken. And we have good examples where Kibaki did not mind about that. And I think within 10 years, he made sure that we maintained our dignity. And if his debts, those were paid.
Magufuli did well?
So I think we have lessons to learn from someone like Kibaki, the 10 years.
Yeah.
Why would we not get back to that? So what you are saying is a possibility, but I think we should be able to have what Prof is saying, critical thinking and visionary leadership, which calls for our dignity, so that at least we are respected globally.
One of the reasons why...
One of the things I'm also not happy is the current program where we are encouraging young people to go to, that's what we are discussing with Alex. We are encouraging young Kenyans who are educated to go out of the country to go and work. I think we need to rethink about that, because what will happen within the next 10, 15 years, we are going to have a generation which has gotten out of the country. Then some of us will be getting old. So are we supposed to manage the economic activities which will be demanding youthful and energetic?
But it's factual that we have a problem with employment.
Yeah, but we have to fix it here, including and that's why I'm talking about stimulating the economy and spurring growth. It was done within 10 years by Kibaki. Why can that be done? So, because the money which is coming from diaspora, surely, I think that's not something to motivate us as a government policy to encourage young people to get out of the country.
And we'll come back to you, Professor, on diaspora remittances.
It's an area which we need to rethink.
Okay,
Yeah.
We'll come back to you, Professor. But first, Alex, I will pick up on that conversation of Kibaki, and we constantly refer to that. We remind ourselves of that. But then the question is this: if really Kibaki did well, don't you think we could have had structures that would not be shaken by any kind of regime that comes on board? And perhaps that's the reason why some of these nations that we speak of are doing well, because the leaders that were there and made the right decisions. They made long-term decisions. They set up structures and systems that were solid enough to carry the country over years. So if Kibaki did well 100%, why is it that we enjoyed the fruits for 10 years? It was like, just basically like the presidential term limits. We're talking about 5 and that's it.
Yes, I concur with that. Kibaki did actually very well, because when he was inheriting the country, the level of public debt was 68% to the GDP. But when Kibaki was leaving the leadership, the level of public debt, he had managed to lower it to 44%. Now, when the government for Uhuru took over, by the time Uhuru was leaving, again, we were in 60s in terms of public debt vis-a-vis the GDP. What Uhuru's government did, they relied so much on commercial loans, because commercial loans are they are charged at a very high interest rates, as opposed to what Kibaki was relying heavily on. Kibaki was relying on concessional loans, and if he couldn't get concessional loans, he would go for semi-concessional loans. And that's why during that time of Kibaki, we didn't issue a Eurobond. But as soon as Uhuru took over in 2014, we issued a Eurobond of $2 billion US dollars. Then in 2018, we issued another $2 billion US dollars. And in 2019, we issued. And the other subsequent loans that we have been borrowing, usually the largest part goes to repay the existing loans. So it becomes like we are borrowing from Paul to pay Peter. So yes, Kibaki, if the subsequent presidents would have followed in the footpath that was created by Kibaki, in terms of what kind of loans do we go for? And we see when Uhuru came into power, there was a bit of a mismatch between the income and liability. Yeah. You see, like now, we are panicking that when it comes to 2024, next year, we are likely to struggle to repay the $2 billion US dollars that we borrowed in form of Eurobond in 2014, because that's when the 10-year will be lapsing. But you see, prudent financial management calls for introduction of something of a sinking fund, that because we knew that in 10 years time we are required to repay the $2 billion US dollars loan, then we would have introduced a kitty that every other year we save a 10% of the $2 billion US dollars, so that at the end of the expiration period, we wouldn't be struggling to say, where do we get the money? Or we would not be forced to go again to the international markets to borrow another loan. And we are suffering a refinancing cost, because even last year, when the government had reached out to the international markets to borrow $1 billion US dollars, the government was unable to do that, because the interest rates that the international markets are demanding is so high and punitive that the government said this is not the right time to borrow. Sure. Even right now, as we speak, the Eurobond that the Kenyan government borrowed, it is not trading at a yield of about 19%. So if we were to borrow another Eurobond, it would not come...
Which is in the pipeline.
Which is in the pipeline. It will come if at the end of the day, we will agree to borrow, it will come at a very high interest rate. And actually the government had been advised to oppose that suggestion of borrowing another Eurobond until the international markets go down to about 7% in terms of interest rates. Right now, what is doing, and the developing country, the emerging markets like Kenya, we are experiencing a capital flight, where the foreign investors, they are relocating their investment from emerging markets, developing countries, to developed countries like US and the West. Because what has happened is due to the monetary tightening by the developed countries, and more so the US, where they keep increasing the Federal Reserve rates, investors find it safer to invest in US other than the developing countries, because investing here has a lot of challenges. One is the issue of the weakening currency, that you can invest here and you are promised a 10% return on your investment. But again, by the time your investment is maturing, assuming you had invested with the Kenyan government for about 2 years, by the time the two years is are elapsing, then the Kenyan currency would have lost value maybe by even 15% against the dollar. So you see, you have received a return of 10%, but you have the currency has lost value by about 15%. So you see, you wouldn't want to risk and invest in such kind of a project.
May I add something to what Alex has talked?
Briefly, Doctor.
Two things. One, Kibaki gave us the constitution, which requires that we enter to work very hard to meet the threshold contained in the constitution. Then the other one was the Vision 2030. And I think deliberately we seem to have deviated from that. And there's nothing we could have, Kibaki would have done to us. So the subsequent regimes, I think we are not able to meet those standards, because Kibaki set the standards. Okay. And we are supposed to achieve them.
All right.
If I may add just to that, yes, Kibaki laid the foundation, because your question was, if he did, then what happened? he ruffled the wrong feathers. Okay?
Yeah.
Right from the beginning, when he said it's equal treatment for everybody, even the British have to go through this. Yeah? No favoritism.
Okay.
I remember one time Charity Gill was complaining how the British government was trying to force her to give favor to the British pharmaceuticals. And he said no. And for that reason, he appeared like a bad man. One time, Edward Clay had said what? That he used to have civilized relations with Moi,
Yeah.
which he doesn't have with Kibaki. You know, now, the consequence of that was an attempt to overthrow Kibaki. There was.
Yeah.
Orchestrated very well. The 205 referendum had very little to do with the document. It had everything to do with getting rid of Kibaki. The ambassadors and the people were saying if the north side wins, Kibaki should get out. Although, you say, no, what are you talking about? The 207 chaos was orchestrated very well.
Okay.
You know, as a way of,
Okay.
you know, so because he was doing well, he became an enemy to some forces. And we saw all those chaos. There is a good book that it was not about Kenya, but it applies.
Yeah.
It's called The Shock Doctrine and the Rise of Disaster Capitalism by Naomi Klein. You seem to be getting independent. Forces come and destabilize you. And Kenya was being destabilized during Kibaki's presidency.
Okay.
For the purposes of control. And that thing. One thing about the remittances, I think you're going to ask.
Yes.
They are very good, but they cannot be the source of everything.
They can't.
They can't. And for them to be operational, we also need to build a very strong base here, so that they have interest in this place. Let me suggest something which is ridiculous, and the economists can see. When you get that money, the $2 billion you're saying, it was 2 billion equal to a certain amount of Kenya shilling at the time. When you are paying, you are not paying the same thing, which is wrong. And I think Alex was trying to explain it. Should be in the process of negotiation. And that's why we need good minds to make a case. You give me $100 billion in shillings. That's what comes to Kenya. Okay? I will return to you $100 billion in Kenya shillings, the way you gave me.
And maybe the
interest.
Yes.
That should be part of the negotiation.
On the table.
On the table.
It should not be altered by how the shilling is performing.
They do that and then they change the exchange rates and then you are in perpetual debt. You can't come out.
You can never come out of it.
No, you can't. So we need to have some radical change in thinking, so that, and it should be a concerted effort by the third world or the global south. Say, no, you give us, or you lend to us. If you don't want to lend, stay with your money. But you lend me $100. I'll pay you, and it turns out...
It doesn't matter the market
situation. It turns out to be $100 is equal to what? 1,000 shillings or 10,000 shillings? 10,000 shillings. Now it's about 8. Okay? So that's what I receive.
Okay.
In order to do what I'm going to do. So, and since you have interest in Kenya, other interests, I'll return your money the way you gave me with its proper interests, and you can use it for your other Kenyan activities.
Fair enough.
So I don't know whether the economy can push that argument.
We're completely out of time, and so we have to close at this very point. But of course, a couple of feedback from you. Collapsed institution is the cause of all our misery on African matters. Our institution called AU is unfortunately dead. And of course, greetings from London. Dr. Masanga says that. And of course, Prof is correct. They will kill you. When I opposed ICC, a certain country wanted to go down with me. This is Dr. Masanga, who is watching as well. So much feedback coming you our way, but then time would not allow for us to